So I've just started recording. So, as you guys are starting to get used to, we have a brief, about a 20 to 25-minute overview, and then we'll have open mic questions afterwards. Usually like to treat the first couple of questions on the topic we talked about, but then after that, we're open to discuss whatever we need. So, you already own a team, as obviously myself, Bob Ballard, Jerry Martin. Say hello, Jerry.
Hello, everybody.
As well as Mary Tucker, who's on the line as well, which you often see getting your invites from. Say hi, Mary.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
So, and of course, our trusted Vice President, Steve Winter. So, just a couple of things I want to make sure to remind everybody. If you obviously we have this forum here for people to ask questions, of course, but you can remember that you can always email us at youalreadyownit@goplanet.com if you have sort of questions about what does this mean or any new announcements from Microsoft or some decision making around features, functions, etc. So please don't hesitate. That's part of your You Already Own It benefits. So today, we also have Colin Ploskaru joining us. Colin, are you out there?
I am certainly here. Hello, everybody.
All righty. So Colin is our Director of Infrastructure. So I'm going to get started on the topic, and Colin and I will probably be tag teaming a little bit on some of these. And then towards the end, I think Colin's going to lead us through sort of a package offering that we have around Azure Site Recovery to get you started. So without any further ado, I'd like to go ahead and jump into it today. So I just want to start off with a few things, right? So, and I don't know, varying degrees of understanding of what Azure Site Recovery is, and we're going to get into the specifics of it a little bit more. But I just like to kick off with a few things. Number one, there was some new announcements that came this month about new Azure to Azure scenarios. I think there's been a lot of calling on this from customers when they're talking about sort of creating multiple instantiations of Azure. That's a big ask that's been going on. Um, Next thing that I want to make sure we all think about it. This is a great way to get started in Azure infrastructure as a service, right? It's sort of like going up to your waist in the cold water, right? It's you're not all in necessarily, provides some tremendous value, but it gives you an opportunity sort of what managing that Azure infrastructure as a service infrastructure looks like. Without necessarily having active production servers up there. That being said, this is also, and Colin, I think can probably add some feedback on this, but this is the preferred migration methodology for getting servers, from on premises into the cloud. Do you have any comments on that, Colin?
Absolutely, you're 100% correct. When it comes to transferring mission critical workloads, this allows us to synchronize them up to the cloud and be able to switch them over to the cloud environment with pretty much zero downtime. So unlike a classic server where we would have to back up the image, copy it up offline, this allows us to do it pretty much instantaneously.
Great, thanks. And there's been some adjustments to pricing, by the way, to accommodate this as a migration strategy as well. I have a slide on that in a minute. And the other part about it is that it offers, and while I still think, and I've done many of these price analysis for customers, that overall using Azure infrastructure as a service can lower your cost in many scenarios overall, especially if you take into account the high availability nature of things. This is even lower cost than that, right? Because the idea is, you're just paying for the storage of the images until you actually have your disaster and need to recover them up there. So, again, just so you guys have a general idea about this, and I always have to do the caveat anytime we talk about Microsoft and pricing, right? That this is retail pricing. You need to contact your your reseller for what your organization's price is. But the idea is a couple of big pieces I want to make sure everyone understands. One, for the first 31 days of any server that you buy, um, Azure Site Recovery is free, right? And so um, that's important to know because basically what this means is this is a free migration tool into Azure, right? And so when you're ready to go, you can pull the trigger on doing some test workloads, leveraging Azure Site Recovery as a great way to sort of do testing on migration strategies, et cetera. And it has no cost except for obviously when we get, um, when you get up there and spinning up the servers themselves, right? Um, but in using it in the traditional sense, right, it's $16 a month retail price per instance that's protected, right? So if you think about that, if I told you, look, you can have a pretty warm standby ready to go in the cloud with very little interaction on your part, ready to spin up for what amounts to, $200 a year, right? More or less. Um, you know, that's pretty good, right? And so, it offers great options for servers that we don't need to be 100% hot standbys ready to go, but want some additional protection were there to be, a significant incident, right? So, before I get into more, before I get into Azure Site Recovery, a little bit more in depth, I thought I'd start talking because the root of all of this is, the Azure Backup Service as well. So, you know, it's pretty straightforward when we think about that. The idea is, hey, my backups are going directly to Azure, and it's the foundation as a part of what Azure Site Recovery is. So, um, so when we think about it, Azure Backup Service, whether it be, by the way, and Colin can probably pop in with a bunch more at some point if we want, but obviously Windows Server Backup, but numerous third parties, and I know we've done a bunch of pilots. Colin, what are some of the third party systems that we've integrated Azure Backup Service with, for instance?
So certainly, the vast majority of your on-prem systems are able to use Azure as an on-site backup. One of the third parties that we've had a lot of success with is actually Veeam. So that's the VMware backup mechanism, which has hooks to tie directly into Azure storage as a backup mechanism, as well as obviously DPM and the Microsoft solutions that are out there for backup and replication.
Right. Thanks, Colin. So, a couple of pieces on this, right? So, take your regular backup methodology. You're able to sort of incorporate that into adding Azure Backup as part of that. But it's more than just taking a secondary copy. You can actually do full recovery to physical systems or VMs or Azure VMs through using Azure Backup, right? Um, you can participate. These systems allow you to go local storage and or Azure storage as well, and the storage rates are extraordinarily affordable. Um, you know, I was pricing out some things. Terabytes of storage for a few $100s a year, right? And so you can affordably get a secondary offsite with that information, right? So, which kind of shifts gears into Azure Site Recovery, right? So there's a couple pieces of this, and Colin, I'm in a minute I'm going to turn it over for you to sort of talk through sort of the process of what the configuration is. Um, but the main gist of it is we have on-premise machines running. They could be virtualized, and when I say virtualized, that is in either Hyper-V or VMware. And Colin can certainly attest to this because we've done a bunch of these pilots together, working with customers. VMware is a supported platform. Obviously, you need some specific versions, but it doesn't have to be literally the one that came out yesterday. As a supported platform, and has been a supported platform. So whether you actually have physical machines that you want to do this with, virtual machines that are in either Hyper-V or VMware, you have the opportunity to sort of synchronize your device, synchronize your images up into Azure. And there are a lot of, and there are some other technologies that do this, right? But I think, and Colin, I've heard you refer to this before. Um, the key difference here is when you layer on the Azure Site Recovery piece, is it actually assesses your machines, gets a Azure virtual machine with the proper configuration ready to spin up your image. And I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit more, Colin.
No, absolutely. And I think that is one of the primary differences, right? So this is more than just a backup solution. It is the ability to pre-stage a virtual machine in the Azure environment that matches the specifications of whatever the workload on premise that we're backing up. And I think that there's a couple of things to mention there. So this covers, as Bob mentioned, physical machines, VMware machines, and Hyper-V machines. Now, with VMware and Hyper-V, depending on a version, then there is the newer version, there is an increasing amount of functionality that's available, up to including testing as well as failover back to on-site. The other piece that I think is important to mention here is, especially if we're leveraging something like System Center Operations Manager, so SOCOM, or OMS in Azure, which also can hybridize with SOCOM, then we can create automated plays that monitor the on-premises workloads, can manage the failover and fail back. And of course, even without those pieces, there is automation that's available on the Azure platform for failover, depending on parameters that we define in disaster scenarios. So for instance, if the machine is down or is not responding to a query for a longer period of time than what we define, then we can either manually or automatically fail that machine over, and then it can trigger a workflow of other things that happen, whether they be DNS records or whatever else have you, to make that workload available.
Absolutely. Thanks, Colin. And just a couple other pieces of information. Some of these things are common knowledge, sometimes they're not. So, the technology behind Azure Site Recovery came from an acquisition from Microsoft of InMage Scout, right? So it provided cross-platform support from the very beginning. I know Microsoft is new and cuddly to multi-platform support, but it wasn't that long ago that that was an unusual behavior. This product was built with that sort of legacy from the very beginning. And, that's a little dose of reality, right? I'm pretty sure we know that not every single customer is 100% Hyper-V across their data center. So this offers a great opportunity to integrate there. And, that piece of automatic configuration, the elements of orchestration, et cetera, really make this we talk about it being a warm standby, but I jokingly, say all the time, there's lukewarm standbys and semi-hot standbys, right? And with the story of actually, leveraging these orchestration pieces through Operations Manager, through VMware monitoring tools, et cetera. There's a number of ways to pull the trigger on this, but plugging all these pieces together, we can literally be spinning up images, in minutes in Azure, but not paying for them to be running 24/7 year round, right? And that's an enormous cost benefit, right? I often talk. I know we've got some East Coast folks on here, et cetera. Everyone says, well, so what's it cost? And I said, well, it costs $16 a month per machine, retail, whatever. And I said, until, there's a significant disaster, and no one cares what it costs once there's actually a disaster and you have to spin up these items. When the hurricane hits and the data center goes down, then at that point, it really doesn't matter what it costs because we need to keep state, city, county, whatever running, right? So we talked a little bit about this a couple of times already, but I just want to make sure, we're clear. One, we can use this tool to replicate Hyper-V to Hyper-V. We can use it to replicate on-premise to Azure, Hyper-V to Azure, VMware, um, or physical devices to VMware or Azure. So this is really an orchestration synchronization engine. And by the way, just added another scenario new in the last, in during this month is we can use this to replicate from one Azure tenant to another, right? So while there are a lot of sort of operational use cases where that makes sense, one of the ones that we see all the time is, I provisioned an Azure environment. We have this new enterprise one. I need to get machines from one to the other. This works for that. This works for having separate isolated machines outside of the traditional Azure framework for redundancy to say, hey, I have one tenant here, one tenant there. I can replicate between them as well. So that is in public preview right now and will be, we will be, and that'll be fully out during sometime over the summer, but is in a fully supported public preview right now. And Colin, that was the next one I was going to get to as well. Is I know we have a lot of government customers. If you are in a commercial Azure tenant and you decide that the application that you have really should be in the Azure government tenant, this makes a very easy migration path for that as well, without having to take it on premise and back up again. So, are there any questions before Colin? Why don't you can hop on and sort of walk them through? And basically, I just took a typical agenda and threw it up here, but walk them through what an Azure ASR Quick Start looks like. Any questions out there? All right, Colin, why don't you go ahead and sort of talk through what this what sort of goes on in a typical Azure Site Recovery Quick Start. And before you start, just one more thing. I'm super impressed with how far we can get customers with this Quick Start. You can actually have a functioning, running, in production environment coming out of this Quick Start. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, Colin?
Sure thing. And as Bob mentioned, this is pretty much of a canned engagement for us. We do this day in and day out. There's a couple of pieces to go into it. So obviously the first and most important piece is to provision the Azure tenant and environment that is going to be leveraged for ASR, for Azure Site Recovery. And that includes setting up networking, making sure that we have DNS straight, setting up whether it is VPN or express route from on-site to the cloud. And I think there have been some recent enhancements to the VPN functionality that now give us up to gigabit range connectivity. Obviously, that's to some degree dependent upon the outbound pipe that's available on premises, but that capability resides within the Azure environment. So once we get those pieces in place, depending on whether the workloads that we're working with are Active Directory integrated or not, we may extend Active Directory into Azure, meaning that we would be constructing an Active Directory site, making sure that we have the correct subnets correlated, kind of all the kit and caboodle that goes into that process. Then setting up the recovery vault. So very similar to Azure Backup, Azure Site Recovery uses recovery vaults, and the settings, meaning how often a virtual machine or a physical machine is being replicated, sort of some of the failover features that are available, and all those are defined on a per vault basis. And we certainly can have any of a number of vaults. So if we have different criticality type workloads that we're working with, we can define various or different backup settings to account for the various different pieces and have workflows that relate to what a failover looks like and the automation around that. So then once we have the vault itself defined, we would go through, and there's a little bit of nuance here because depending on the version of virtualization or physical machines that we have on site, there's a little bit of difference in the way that it gets implemented. But generally speaking, and if we're dealing with older versions of VMware or Hyper-V or physical machines, we would be setting up the management server on site. And really the management server can be a virtual machine. All it really does is act as a local bridgehead of managing replications of on-premises workloads to the cloud. It is managed through the Azure portal, and there will be agents that are installed either on virtual machines or potentially on newer versions on the hosts that are running the virtual machines within the virtualization clusters, or physical machines, obviously. And then at that point, really the first part, and the part that takes a little bit longest or longer because it is the initial backup, is the actual first initial replication. Everything that occurs after that initial replication is going to be a differential. So once we go through the initial process of backing up the machine, then subsequent backups become very, very fast. The image itself is being stored as a VHD file, and I think this plays to some degree a role in kind of the background mentality that goes into ASR. Very similar to something like DPM or a lot of your other backup methodologies, we're creating a virtual hard drive or collection of virtual hard drives if a server has multiple drives that are being stored in Azure Backup or within the backup within Azure storage. The added benefit again there, as we had talked, is the fact that when we trigger a failover, then the basic constraints of the virtual machine or the physical machine, meaning the number of vProcs, the amount of RAM, drive sizes, all those things are ready to go within the Azure environment, and as well as any networking configuration or integration that needs to occur there. So then, in a perfect world scenario that takes care of all the various automation pieces that are required to get an actual machine up and running, it saves several steps. This would be potentially possible by using Azure Backup as well, but obviously then all those provisioning pieces would be manual as opposed to being automated, and then you'd have to create a virtual machine, connect the hard drives, assign the resources necessary, spin it up, and then make sure all the networking and everything else was in place. So during our pre-CAN engagements, which normally tend to last about a week or so, we get all the basic infrastructure stood up. We will go through and protect up to 5 machines, and obviously this varies greatly on a customer-to-customer basis. We would test failover, make sure that everything is set up incorrectly, and we can spin up the machines within the Azure environment, and really spend a remainder of the time making sure that we're providing knowledge transfer and familiarization for your IT folks to become familiar with the platform. The end result or the goal for us, obviously, as well as setting up a test or a proof of concept environment, is to make sure that you understand the technology and ultimately going forward can both run with it and add additional workloads, as well as have the knowledge to be able to leverage the platform or to come back with us if there are additional needs.
Well, thank you, Colin. Is there anything else?
So again, when it comes to the ASR platform, there's a fair amount of flexibility. We tend to cater the proof of concepts based on the customer specific needs. And there are a lot of different pieces that we can fit within that period of time. So obviously there's always a conversation that we want to have with you folks to make sure that we understand exactly what we're doing, or what the goal is, rather.
Absolutely. So a couple of things I just wanted to add to this. So, and obviously, everyone on this call is familiar with, sort of, what can be like to work with Microsoft around this time of the year as we straddle from one fiscal year to another. But historically, there have been opportunities to get funding for this quick start from Microsoft, right? Either some or all of it. So if there's an interest, let us know, as we kick off into next fiscal year. I'm sure there will be other programs. We can try to see if we can find one that will map to this, that maybe be able to fund this as well. But, even so, right, this is a, $10,000-ish kind of project, not a $30,000, $50,000 project, right? And so, so these quick starts are, get in, get out, get you running, teach you how to use it. And obviously, sometimes we have customers come back and say, we'd like you to do a significant amount more. Sometimes we have customers say, you've got me set up, got me going, gave me a great foundation. We'll take it from here. Both, you know, completely great outcomes either way, right? So, before we slip into some of the other wrap up things, I just wanted to know, were there any technology questions on ASR? I know Ken, you're out there, Michael, a few others. Anybody have some questions?
Hey, Bob, this is Joanne. I actually have a question.
Awesome.
Is there a target on-prem environment or a scenario that our clients could target initially that would either give either for a quick proof of concept or to get one of those funding examples that you talked about that would be sort of a quick impact or a quick either on cost or on productivity?
Yeah, so I'll answer first, Colin, and then pipe in if you have any additional thoughts, right? So, you know, so when we say the quick start gives you up to 5 servers, if you want 5, right, the idea would be to target, low utilization boxes, some things like that. Those are the safest. However, I can tell you, by the way, we've had customers look at this the other way, which is, I wouldn't say, hey, my first target is the entire SAP system, right? Probably not a good idea. But an impactful server in your infrastructure, right, that maybe is not truly highly available today, and you have the opportunity to target a few of those and get a reasonably low cost. So, let's be honest. If somebody came in and said, hey, we have this application for, this department, agency, whatever, and today it's not really highly available, and you need to make it highly available. If I told you, well, you could do that for roughly $250 a year, you're not doing that on premise for $250 a year, right? So oftentimes I like to tell people to target sort of things that they would like to get up to high availability, not but aren't, right? So that typically takes away tier 1 stuff is not in this, but that next step down, tier 2 applications that are out there that may not be highly available, that's the sweet spot. I don't know, Colin, do you have any other thoughts?
No, and I think you captured pretty well the types of engagements that we go through, and I would echo what you just said, Bob, which is that some of our customers decide to kick the tires, and we go with fairly low impact servers, but we've also had customers come along and say, hey, we have this really mission critical workload. We're not necessarily wanting to put it up in Azure right off the bat, but it's not protected, and if we can get it protected, then that's what we need to focus on. And so we've kind of done both of those approaches. Ultimately, whatever works for the customer is the approach that we want to take.
Thanks. Anybody else have any questions? I heard somebody come off mute. You're quiet out there this month, Ken and Michael. You guys got any questions? Are you guys doing anything with Azure right now? I can't even remember off the top of my head.
No, I don't have any questions. I've used Azure Backup in the past, so I'm pretty familiar with it.
Okay, so have you done anything with Azure Site Recovery yet, though?
Not on the realm of recovery of VMs and
Right.
being able to transfer them from Azure tenant to tenant. I thought that was pretty neat.
And obviously from on-premise to Azure as well, as either a migration strategy, right, which is one thing, but also as to regularly have the synchronization going so that you can use it as a quick failover, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions out there? Questions specifically on the quick start? Well, so either we did a really good job of covering the topic this month. So, but before we get out of here, I'm sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, sorry, Bob, you might have said this, but did you give a time frame on what the quick start really, how long that takes typically?
Yeah. So it's roughly, and again, these depend a little bit, but they're roughly about a week. Um, depending on the circumstances, they tend to come in. If you're looking at a general dollar frame, and again, it depends a little bit on the objectives of the customer, but they're roughly in the $10,000 range. Oftentimes, many of the programs, and Joanne, you would obviously know as recently as, just a month ago,
Right.
that there were Azure funding programs that covered these types of activities, and I would expect there'll be those continuing next fiscal year at Microsoft. So, so oftentimes they can be covered as well. So, if you're thinking about this in as little as a week, you can actually have a viable failover scenario in Azure and also a pre-configured migration gateway set up and ready to go for particular applications that make sense for you. Um, to me, and I love our quick start methodology. I think it's a great way for customers to get to understand things and get going. Um, I can't think of a single one that gets you further within the quick start framework than this one does. Right. So this is absolutely one of my favorites, and I recommend it to all my customers because what you're left with is literally a plug and play migration gateway and a plug and play high availability DR gateway just sitting there ready to go, bringing in, you can add additional servers to. Any other questions? All right, Jerry, since I think I'm required by law on every planet, every planet presentation to talk for a couple seconds about Evolve 365, I thought I'd give Jerry the opportunity to talk about it this time. So, primarily this month's topic was around Azure technologies, but as you know, this is the cloud community call, and what's more important in the cloud than making sure your end users know how to use these technologies deployed in the cloud. So I thought I'd take just a second and let Jerry talk about. Whoops, I went too fast. You had to talk in 1 second, Jerry. There you go.
Well, I tell you, the You Already Own It program provides benefits for our clients that does include a roadmap and planning sessions at a periodic nature, depending on your subscription. One of the things that's real important about that is to be able to spend a great deal of time talking with some of our architects around ASR, for example, this month's topic, and a number of others, to extend those benefits even further, as well as to drive what I consider to be a world-class end-user support system. Evolve 365 provides both of those for you. So not only are we taking care of your end customers as well as any change that goes on in your environment as your tenant continues to evolve, but you're also have available to you vision and planning sessions extending what you already get for You Already Own It in order to be able to work on some design sessions with our experts and 365 architects across the board, whether it's end-user impacting scenarios or whether it's things like ASR that allows you to really provide some operational and back-end efficiencies in your data center and data center cloud hybrid scenarios. So just an Evolve 365 plug, but a really way to tie it back to what we're talking about today is to focus not just on the critical help desk as a service support, live support, but also that vision and planning that comes with that as well.
So, without any further questions, is there any further questions out there? How about in general on the You Already Own It service, technology questions, or sort of off topic, right? I know, Ken, you always have questions floating out there about something Microsoft's doing, so feel free to broaden the topic this month. Quiet. Alrighty then. If there are no other questions, I guess we will wrap for today. So thanks everyone for their time. Look forward to seeing folks next month. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.